it's not a store you can go in and just pick and choose, those guys got to be available, and there just wasn't a ton available this year. So we always look at a lot of things, have some conversations, talk to people. Not a lot materialized this year.
This is where Wisconsin gathers to talk sports. Packers, Brewers, Badgers, Bucks. The Wisco Sports Show is on the air. Now, here's your host, Grant Bills.
I always like it when folks with sports teams or people that cover sports teams stand up for the fans, right? I think one of my favorite moments from this past Brewers season is when Todd Rosiak, bless his heart, because I like Todd and I don't think Todd did anything wrong here, asked Pat Murphy, well, a lot of fans online, they wonder, what does Andrew Monasterio do here, was basically the spirit of his question. Which, I guess, Todd, just ask why Andrew Monasterio over certain other players, was basically the premise of Todd's question, which I think is a fair one. But he used the fans as kind of the tip of the spear to ask the question. And Murphy, fair or unfair, and we celebrated this on the show, I loved it, said, hey, now, don't put down our fans. Don't put down our fans. We have smart fans. Don't talk about fans like they're dumb. I like when reporters or coaches, I like when they have the fans back. I don't like when people talk down on fans. Well, that's fans are dumb, I don't like that. And I don't think Brian Gutekunst was talking down to fans or talking down to the media with that comment when he says, well, it's not a grocery store. You can't just go in and pick out the players. But it reminds me of that scene from The Office when Michael is leaving. Spoiler alert, if you've never seen it, Michael leaves us a show in season 6 or 5, I don't know. And he gives Oscar that little corn husk doll that's just an awful gift. And the point of the bit is Oscar has such a low opinion of Michael. He goes, thank you, Michael. This is great. And then Michael gets back at his office. He's like, he has the lowest opinion of me. I gave him this garbage gift and he just took it. And listening to Goody there say, well, it's not just a store where you can go in and pick out the players you want. It's like, man, we know that, Brian. Don't you have the lowest opinion of the way we follow football and the way that we think about football? It's not a store. You just go shopping. We know, Brian. It's good to know that you have a high opinion of the fans in the media and our intelligence level. It's the Wisco Sports Show. My name is Grant Bills. I hope you're having an excellent day. Thank you for being here. Loaded show tonight. I don't throw the L word around. That's a show that should be reserved for only the best shows. But I think this is a loaded show. Jesse Temple of The Athletic is going to join us at 4:30. He normally comes 5:30 on Wednesdays. But you're going to hear that conversation in about a half hour because Matthew Coller, Purple Insider, he covers the Vikings, wrote a really good story that I really liked about the trade deadline today at Purple Insider. And he covers the Vikings, but with the Packers on bye this week and just an awesome NFL guest, super knowledgeable, love his takes. He's going to join us at 5:30 after the Vikings have locker room and a couple things. So a little bit of a shuffle. I always pre-record with Jesse. His schedule is earlier in the day. So I talked with Jesse at 2:30 this afternoon. And I think that's as fired up as I've heard Jesse. Now, he wasn't screaming and yelling about the state of the Badgers, but he was a little fired up. And I think with good reason after they gave up 40-plus points to Iowa, a team that doesn't really like to score. So that's an outstanding conversation. Can't wait to play that for you and can't wait to connect with Matthew Coller at 5:30. Two awesome football guests, one college, one pro tonight. You could join the show if you'd like. I'd love to take your call, 608-321-1670. And the show is always live streaming on YouTube, Facebook. Just look up the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills. I am on Twitter at Wisco Grant if you want to interact with me there, and the show streams on that platform as well if you follow me at Wisco Grant. I want to revisit the NFL trade deadline just a little bit, and especially the Packers' role and the move that they made yesterday, trading Preston Smith. And we learned today when Preston spoke with media in Pittsburgh, he actually requested this trade a couple of weeks ago, which isn't that shocking. And I don't really think negatively of him because of it. It makes sense. He wasn't really being used in a way that's, I think, most conducive to his skill set and the player that he is. His role was limited. And he was probably going to get cut at the end of this year, and he probably knew it. And he's like, look, if you guys are just going to move in another direction anyways, can you just trade me now to a team where I'm going to fit better? And I think Pittsburgh is an awesome spot for him. He gets to be the third or fourth pass rusher along with Nick Herbig in a 3-4 defense, which is much more conducive to his skill set. So all is well that ends well. And I think the means justified the ends as well. It's not like he stopped showing up. He quietly requested a trade, and the Packers found a way to get it done. So I think a win-win for everybody. But that was a little breaking news today. Preston Smith said, yeah, I actually requested the trade. Last night and today, I'm sensing some frustration from Packers fans about the way that the deadline was handled yesterday. And it's not everybody. I wouldn't even say that it's a huge crowd of Packers fans that are upset, but it is a portion of Packers fandom that's kind of giving us the usual talking points and complaints. And I want to address that because if that's what people are talking about, that's what I want to talk about. It's a lot of the same complaints that we normally hear, the same nitpicks. I don't want to make it sound like they're complaints or they're whines. I'm not going to tell you how to fan. If you're not happy with yesterday, that's fine. It's just a lot of the same talking points that I think we often hear fans make and deliver about the Packers. It was, well, they were in the mix. They were in the conversation. Right? They were close again, but they couldn't close the deal. Right? These are the things that we always complain about. First of all, I'm not sure it's a bad thing to be in every conversation, to be in the mix on every player. Sometimes fans talk about that like it's a bad thing. Why do we complain about that? Let's just stop for a second. Because I think we all kind of mock the Packers. Oh, they made a call. They were in the mix. I understand that it's repetitive and Goody always says the same thing. And we hear the same song and dance in every press conference, but cliches are a fact of life in press conferences. That's always how sports press conferences are going to be. So let's grow up and get past that for a sec and realize that press conferences are never going to be super juicy and they're never going to be fully and 100% honest with us about everything. So let's grow up, get past that. Now that we're past that, what would you rather Goody say? What would you prefer Goody's approach to be? We didn't make a single call. We're happy with our team. We didn't even ask. We didn't even inquire. Didn't even look around. We didn't even check in. Like, no, I want them in the mix on all these players. I want them inquiring, even if it's a super short phone call, even if it's like the length of when I've gotten these political calls. And they've been really good at sourcing these political calls from area codes, which I'm going to answer. Like if I get just make one up, 871 call. It's like, I'm not answering that. But if I get a 608, it's like, is that a cousin whose number I didn't save? Like 608 or 414 or 715, I'll take that call. And it's always like, hello, my name is Mary with America Now. And I click and I hang it up, right? Even if that's the length of the phone call, even if Goody calls up, pick a GM, whoever. Hey, Mike, I'm just calling to ask about blah, blah, blah. What are we thinking there? Yeah, we're thinking we're going to hang on to him. We're not taking offers. Okay, good to know. Well, I hope everything is well. Maybe we'll make a deal somewhere down the line. Good luck. Even if that's the call, that's a worthwhile call. I want Brian Gutekunst making that call. He's in the mix. He's in the conversation. I'd way rather have that than no, we didn't call. We didn't check. We didn't look into it. We weren't in the mix. I'd way rather have them in the mix. I also think it's not a little unfair. I think it's very unfair to get on Brian Gutekunst's case for being passive this season. And I saw some of these comments during Bill's show today, and I heard a little bit of this online during the show last night as well, where it's like, well, that's classic Packers, never going all in, never pushing chips to the middle of the table, never being aggressive to really try to go for it. Okay, well, if your version of going all in is the Packers trading first-round picks and second-round picks in the middle of the year, okay, well, they're never going to do that. That's just not how they operate. So you're always going to be upset if that's what you want. But if you wanted the Packers to trade some picks and go get a guy and you're like, oh, they've been way too passive, they're not being aggressive. Oh, okay, look at it this way. Last year, by the end of the season, the Packers were the most promising, up-and-coming, young, exciting team in the league. And we were at the Super Bowl on Radio Row, and that's what everyone was talking about. Everyone, of course, is talking Niners, and everyone's talking Chiefs, but Jordan Love was there. Everyone wanted an interview with Jordan Love. He was on every show. Man, the Packers, they took 1 year off, and look, they're back with another high quality quarterback. It seems like they found another guy. They're about to open another window of contention, right? There was so much excitement, and the Packers were getting so much praise. Nobody would have said anything. No one would have said boo this offseason if Brian Gutekunst completely and totally 100% ran back the same team. If Goody brought back the same team, no additions, everyone would have been like, well, that makes sense. Look where they were last year. You're the most exciting, promising, young, up-and-coming, sexy team on the block. They're building. Of course he brought back the same team. And yet, Brian Gutekunst spent almost 120 combined millions of dollars on Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney. Now, they're not going to see all that money, but that was the cumulative value of Xavier McKinney was almost 70 million. Josh Jacobs was like 48, 49 million, something like that. That money's probably never going to be realized, and maybe they'll be restructured or whatever. But the point is, the total quantity of millions of dollars spent on contracts to free agency to just those two players amounted this offseason to $120 million. And no one would have said boo had the Packers just brought back the exact same team. I think the Packers get credit for that, right? I have a hard time now, just a couple months later, being like, well, they didn't do enough. Because they didn't, trade a third and a fourth round pick for a corner. I would have liked a little more corner depth. I keep saying that, but if the right player wasn't out there, the right player wasn't out there. It's not just a store that you go to, shop and pick your favorite player out. That's not how it works. I just think we are so quick to move on from the massive investments the Packers made this offseason in those two free agents alone. And they extended Jordan Love. And I know that this is a product of the way that the league works. When a quarterback's up for an extension, they become, if not the highest paid quarterback, close to the highest paid quarterback. I get that. That's what everybody does. So I'm not going to act like Brian Gutekunst completely went off script and did something that other general managers wouldn't have done. But do you think Bengals ownership would have paid Jordan Love this offseason? Or what about the Cowboys? At the very least, it would have dragged out. The Cowboys waited until the Sunday morning of week 1 to pay Dak Prescott. Now, the Packers took an extra week going into training camp before getting across the finish line, but they didn't let a lack of payment. They didn't let any drama roll into the season. They paid their quarterback. They spent $120 combined million on two free agents. They've been aggressive. Give them credit for that. And I just think in November 2024, just because they had a quiet trade deadline, they didn't acquire anyone yesterday, I have a hard time beating up on the Packers for being passive. I have a really hard time being passive. And I know Rodgers was on the McAfee show yesterday. Well, the Packers love their draft picks. It's okay. Well, they spent a pile of money this offseason to go get a couple guys. It seemed like they're pretty all in to me. You want them to trade 3 firsts for Myles Garrett, Max Crosby? Those guys weren't even available. So why are we cooking up these fantasy situations and then getting mad that the Packers didn't live out these fantasy situations? You know what I mean? Most fan bases in the NFL are in the same spot today. Most. It was a relatively quiet trade deadline. At least quiet compared to what it could have been. Matthew Coller wrote at Purple Insider today, and he's going to join us in hour number 2. His column was titled, Trade Deadline Reaction, Where Did the Sellers Go? The Vikings didn't make a move, ... Basically, neither did anybody else. So you think about the moves that were made. Washington did make a splash play for a corner. They gave up a third and a fourth for Marshawn Lattimore. They needed a corner. That wasn't the rich get richer. Their secondary is bad. They needed that. They needed that corner, right? And they had the extra third-round pick because Howie Roseman, trade god, gave them a third for Jahan Dotson, who's, go figure, doing just as little in Philly as he was in Washington. Shocker. But hey, Jahan Dotson's a player that we all knew, so Howie Roseman, fleeces again. The Lions acquired Zadarius Smith, but they probably wouldn't have done that had not for an injury to Aiden Hutchinson occurred, right? Like that wouldn't have been a move that they would have made. So that was in response to an injury, as Goody talked about in his presser yesterday. It's like, yeah, a lot of the moves around the league and deal with an injury. Right now, the Steelers made a couple moves, very, very shrill, responsible moves, but they needed an edge rusher in Preston Smith, and the Packers had an edge rusher available. Preston Smith said today, I actually requested the trade. Okay, makes sense he was available. That was for a 7th. And then they acquired Mike Williams for what? A 4th? Okay, well, if the Packers needed a wide receiver, maybe they would have done that, but they don't need a wide receiver. So, I can't. Well, look at what the Steelers did. Well, the Steelers have different needs. It's not, go trade for the Mike Williams of edge rusher. Well, the Mike Williams of edge rushers wasn't available, right? And the Preston Smith of cornerbacks wasn't available. Otherwise, maybe the Packers make a move. I don't think they had their eyes and ears, and I don't think they had blocked themselves off. Just players that weren't available. The NFL has to be the most difficult league in which to make a midseason move. Baseball, you can add a reliever, you can add a bat. There's hundreds of players by comparison. These rosters are huge. There's more uses and spots to stick guys. Well, sure, we'll grab Nick Mears. Sure, we'll grab Joakim Soria and Xavier Cedeno. Why not? If they don't work out, we're out a prospect we're not really that high on anyways. We can get other prospects and we flip this guy in the offseason because that's what the Brewers do, right? In the NBA, you can go get a 3-and-D wing. You can get, right? The NFL, it's a difficult league. Every team is trying to win as much as possible all the time, right? It's a difficult league in which to make a move. And I'll play this comment from Brian Gutekunst one more time.
It's not a store you can go in and just pick and choose, those guys got to be available, and there just wasn't a ton available this year. So we always look at a lot of things, have some conversations, talk to people, but not a lot materialized this year.
I would have loved a corner for reasons that I've talked about over and over and over again. I don't trust Jair to stay healthy. And why would I? He hasn't been healthy. Okay. But who'd you want him to get? DJ Reed wasn't available. Greg Newsome wasn't available. And I guess Marshawn Lattimore for a third and a fourth, but that's steep. And if the Packers offered a third and a fourth, who's to say the Saints don't go back to the Commanders and say, actually, we want a second and a third? The Commanders needed him more than the Packers needed him. They were probably willing to pay more, and they have a new owner who's probably more likely to push it across the finish line. So I very much understand why the trade deadline went down the way that it did for the Packers yesterday, and I think we should be hesitant, at the very least, to really slam them for a lack of aggression, because they've shown plenty of aggression going back to the offseason. I know that feels like ancient history, but they did spend a combined $120 million on Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs. By the way, Jeremy Inscani tweets in, thank you for this. Thank you for keeping me on my toes. I didn't mean shrill of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I meant shrewd. Thank you, Jeremy, on Twitter. I appreciate that. Now we can move on. 3 minutes. If you have any remaining thoughts on the NFL trade deadline yesterday or what the Packers did or didn't do, I'll take your calls and texts next. We're closing in on Jesse Temple of The Athletic, who's going to be here at 4:30 to talk Badgers. I can't wait to play you this interview. It's very good. They all are. A little extra juice this week. Jesse's fed up, and Badgers fans are too. So this interview is going to reflect that, and I can't wait to play it for you. But your thoughts next. 608-321-1670.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Yeah, we're excited to see both those guys, see some more snaps. I think certainly they've earned it. I thought they did a really nice job in training camp, and they've continued that through practice. And I think Mosby's done a really nice job on teams for us. And Britton's just really, I think he's eager, and we're eager to see him.
That's Brian Gutekunst yesterday talking about the two players that are going to get more snaps now that Preston Smith is gone. And it's not just those two guys. I expect Lucas Van Ness will play a lot more too, or at the very least, he'll have opportunities to play a lot more. If Brenton Cox Jr. or Aaron Mosby start to play really awesome, well, then they'll play more. It's not like Lucas Van Ness. It's like, okay, well, here's 20 additional snaps a game. Go nuts. It's like, no, I'm trying to win a Super Bowl here, man. Like, I get you were a top 15 pick, but if one of these other guys is giving us better rushes and, better stoppage and run, better run fits, that kind of thing, like, I think that this is wide open behind Rashawn Gary. And I think Kingsley Enagbare has earned a certain level of stature, let's say, for lack of a better term. He's really, so far this year, been the edge rusher, the only edge rusher that's lived up to my expectations. Now, my expectations for Enagbare weren't nearly as high as they were for Gary or for Van Ness, but he's met my expectations. Gary has not. And maybe it's unfair to say that Lucas Van Ness has not met my expectations. He certainly hasn't met my hopes for where he'd be in year two, and he could. Maybe he turns it on over the next, how many games do they have left? What are they, 6-3, which means they have, 9 games left? 9 and 8 games left? You get what I mean. The second part of the season coming out of the bye. Clemhead Mike texts in, says Jacobs and Xavier McKinney were well worth the money. Yes. And I bring those two up because it's so easy to forget that Brian Gutekunst cut a check. Well, not a check. He cut multiple checks, but the money committed to those two players and those two contracts totaled about $120 million. So I have a little bit of a difficulty saying, well, Goody, he didn't do enough yesterday. Well, if there would have been a Preston Smith at corner or a Mike Williams at edge rusher, well, then maybe he would have made those acquisitions. The only corner that really got moved yesterday was Marshawn Lattimore, and it was a king's ransom for a team that really needed him. I'd love a corner. I think on some level they need a corner. They don't need a corner as bad as Washington does. So Washington's compelled to pay more, and they did. They paid for a third and a fourth round pick, and they have 2/3 because of the trade for Jahan Dotson that they made with the Eagles. If you have any thoughts on yesterday's trade deadline, I have some thoughts on some other teams as well. But if you have anything to say about the Packers and Preston Smith, who we learned today, actually requested the trade a couple weeks ago. 608-321-1670. Duncan Holman texts in and says, guys, Jeremy the grammar cop is here. Yeah, I made the mistake of saying the Pittsburgh Steelers were shrill in their acquisition of both Mike Williams and Preston Smith. Shrewd, not shrill. Thank you. The show could not have possibly continued without that correction, and I love Jeremy's tweets, so I'm giving him a hard time. Matthew Coller is going to join us in about an hour and 10 minutes to talk about the trade deadline. He covers the Vikings, purpleinsider.com. He's got a book about PFF. It's called It's a Numbers Game. It is excellent, and he's just a great football guest. He wrote today at Purple Insider, and I'm going to read directly from this story for 2 paragraphs worth, not even. The New Orleans Saints were one of the few sellers in their right mind on Tuesday, trading Marshawn Lattimore to Washington, and Cleveland dipped its toe in the seller's water by dealing Zadarius Smith to Detroit. But otherwise, almost everybody else stood around and shrugged their shoulders. The Panthers didn't move Adam Thielen, Jadeveon Clowney, or Miles Sanders. The Giants didn't move Azeez Ojulari or Darius Slayton. The Raiders didn't trade defensive tackle Adam Butler, and the Patriots didn't trade Jonathan Jones or KJ Osborne. Tennessee didn't move Sebastian Joseph Day. Crickets. So you could throw a couple other names in there. I think these are reaches, but a team could have called the Patriots and been like, we'll give you a haul for Christian Gonzalez. A team could have called Tennessee and said, hey, we'll give you a haul for Jeffrey Simmons. Those are, I don't want to say that Christian Gonzalez is a franchise cornerstone for the Patriots right now, but if you asked a Patriots fan, hey, after Drake May, what building blocks do you have? Christian Gonzalez is probably the first or second name out of their mouth. So it's more understandable as to why the Patriots wouldn't move Christian Gonzalez over Jonathan Jones or KJ Osborne. KJ Osborne, they probably should have traded. He's been nothing but a pain in their ass, complaining on social media and stuff. But Matthew's point is there's all these teams that aren't any good. They have 3 wins or less apiece, and they're holding on to players that would have real value elsewhere, especially the Panthers. Veteran Adam Thielen, veteran Jadeveon Clowney, and maybe he's not a veteran. He's the same age as, or he's about the same age as Saquon Barkley. He's not a raggedy veteran like Thielen, but a nice, solid player with good experience that a contender would want. Miles Sanders. The Cowboys, for example. If I were the Cowboys, I just would have done everything differently. Their season's probably shot, but obviously they don't think so. They're like, yeah, we'll give up a fourth for Jonathan Mingo, who's been mostly a bust in Carolina anyways. Coller's point, and we'll talk to him more about this in an hour, is there are all these teams that aren't any good, and they held on to players who we thought they maybe would trade. Maybe it would make sense for them to trade. And on one hand, I'm confused, as I think Matthew explains in his column. Like, why the heck do the Titans need Jeffrey Simmons? They're so far away. The Titans feel so far away from contention. The Panthers feel so far away from contention. And the Patriots, well, I don't think they have as attractive of pieces as those other teams. They feel so far away from contention. Why don't the Titans get a king's ransom for Jeffrey Simmons? Why don't the Panthers get a couple nice picks for this year's upcoming draft for Thielen, who's old, or Clowney, who, what good is Jadeveon Clowney to the Carolina Panthers this year? So on one hand, I'm confused, and I'm like, I don't know that that's good business. But on the other hand, also, should the Titans just have no good players at all? Should the Panthers have no good players? Like, these teams should have good players. This is the analytics quandary, right? You know the quote, the very dramatic quote from Harry Potter, when it's like, and I can't remember which movie, maybe Goblet of Fire, maybe Order of the Phoenix, where Dumbledore goes, there comes a time, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said, there comes a time where we must choose between what is right and what is easy, right? NFL teams, general managers, and not just in the NFL, but across sports, I think these general managers often have to decide what is right, what is perfect business for team building, and what's fair to our fans. You know what I mean? Like, would it be fair to Titans fans to just trade Jeffrey Simmons? Titan fans who are going through it. They're watching Derrick Henry succeed in Baltimore. They're watching A.J. Brown now for a couple of years, just light it up in Philly. Their team stinks. They don't know if their coach is any good. They probably don't have a quarterback because it doesn't seem like Will Levis is it. They seem rudderless. Should they not be allowed to have Jeffrey Simmons too? Like, you can't have one redeeming thing. The Panthers have to be in hell. Panthers fans have to be in hell as much as any fan base in sports. Do they not get Adam Thielen and Miles Sanders and Jadeveon Clowney? Like, should they just get rid of those players and get even worse? I do understand general managers. It's like, well, we got to have somebody. There needs to be some recognizable player. There needs to be one point of excitement somewhere on this godforsaken roster. Right? But if I was a robot, or if I was AI building and team building and general managing the Panthers, I'd be like, well, we can get a fifth. Can we get a fifth for Adam Thielen? Can we get a fourth for Jadeveon Clowney? Can we get a fourth or a fifth for Miles Sanders? Like, that's real draft capital for a team that needs the draft capital. They don't need Thielen. They don't need these players. But I think oftentimes in sports in 2024, these general managers, they're fighting between analytically what is correct and what is stomachable, let's say, right? Like baseball. I don't know that what's most analytically sound and what's smartest is necessarily what's best for the fans. Basketball too, like numerically, layups and threes. Those are the worthwhile shots. But is that the best product for fans? There's always this struggle between, well, we want to be forward thinking. We want to be progressive. We want to be woke with the shots that we attempt and the strategy that we employ. But like, this isn't a computer simulation. We also have to field a team that our fans are going to accept even in the lean years. So I don't know. We'll continue this conversation a little bit with Matthew Coller, Purple Insider, in an hour, who's kind of writing about this concept at Purple Insider earlier today. And you can go read it. It's free. Subscribe to his Substack. Just use your email. And if you want to subscribe and actually pay him, you can do that as well. And I would. It's just like there's so many writers that I have on the show. It's like, guys, I literally won't have any money if I subscribe to all of you. One call, and then we'll go to Jesse Temple. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Grant, it's Q.
Q, what's going on?
I figured I should call in because we actually agree for once.
Oh, look at us. It's a big week for us.
Yeah. Do you feel like the Packers are a player or two away from the Super Bowl?
No, I think you can make the Super Bowl with this team. You got to stay healthy, got to be lucky, but that's true of every team, right?
But like, just the fact that you're hesitating tells me, like, given this is the youngest team in the league, like, we've got years of competitive football left in the tank.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't feel like the year to push our chips in.
I don't know that there will ever be a year where the Packers push their chips. If they make trades, it's like, this is good value, right? It's not like, oh, we have to do something, let's do this. I think there's an important distinction between those two modes of thinking.
Oh, definitely. But I also think, like, we're lucky to have a good drafting team in the back half of the rounds. So, like, a 6th and 7th round pick means a lot more to us than it does to other teams.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I'm at. And I guess, like, I think the Packers are a second half team, but just given Love's health this season, I'm glad they didn't, like, mortgage the future for this year.
No, and I don't know that they will ever do that. Q, I appreciate it. Maybe salary cap wise, they did a little bit at the end with Aaron Rodgers, but they're never trading multiple first the way that the Rams did, for example. I agree with all that. The one thing that you said, and I saw you comment on the live stream as well, the one thing that I'd tap my foot on the brakes just a little bit is saying, hey, we got years and years ahead of us. Hopefully. You just never know, right? Like, you just never know. Like, I would have said the same thing as a Brewers fan in 2018. And I guess they have competed every year since then, but the team has taken different shapes. 2018 didn't feel like the beginning of something. 2018 is as close as they got for the remainder of Greg Council's tenure, and ever since, even the first year of Pat Murphy. So I'm always a little leery of that thinking, but yes, they have a great window, and I wouldn't want to do anything to upset that. And I don't think the Packers would. It's like, hey, can we get Azeez Ojulari for a 5th? Can we get Greg Newsome for a 4th or a 5th, just as a little Jair Alexander insurance? That kind of thing. I don't think they were ever looking at anything past that, as evidenced by what they did, which was absolutely nothing. Let's talk with Jesse Temple, The Athletic. We'll talk Wisconsin, Iowa with Jesse next.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 5 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 4 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Dark and difficult times lie ahead. Soon we must all face the choice between what is right and what is easy.
It's just an incredible line. And I think it goes really hard in the trailer, too. If you watch the trailer for Goblet of Fire, oh, what a great angsty teen movie. I said horn is something. Hormone-filled, angsty teenage years. Goblet of Fire. I was right. It was Goblet of Fire. Just such, just excellent. Just outstanding film. Speaking of outstanding, corny radio segue. Jesse Temple. I talked to them earlier this afternoon. Wisconsin, Iowa. That's about as bad as it gets. And I think Jesse's commentary today did a great job attacking that game and exactly how bad of a look it was for Wisconsin. Here's our conversation from earlier today. Jesse Temple is here. You can find his work at The Athletic. Excellent writer and also an outstanding podcast co-host to Zach Heilprin on The Camp. I thought they were going to win this game, Jesse. I thought they were going to beat the Hawkeyes 42-10, or they were going to beat the Hawkeyes. They end up losing 42-10. I also thought they were going to beat Penn State. I feel a lot sillier now after this game, thinking my team was going to win than I did against Penn State a week ago. Did this game shatter your expectations that you had coming in the way that it did mine?
I did not think Wisconsin was going to win this game. I
Okay.
picked Iowa. I didn't think Iowa would win by 32 points and have its largest margin of victory in the series since 1968. But I've been feeling this way and saying this for quite some time. They're going to have to show me they can win a big game before I ever decide to pick Wisconsin again, because they have not managed to do that for at least a couple of years. And not only was it bad, but frankly, it was embarrassing. I think the one thing Wisconsin has shown this season in big games is that it's pretty decent at taking a 3-0 lead. And whatever happens from there, I suppose all bets are off. Look, I mean, they're 5-4 overall. They're 3-3 in the Big Ten. They are not the worst college football program in the country. They're just an average college football team. And unfortunately for Badgers fans, that's kind of where Wisconsin has been here. And you just don't want to be mired in mediocrity. It's just when you go into a game like this on primetime on NBC for a second time in a row, and you have a performance like this, it leaves everybody's head scratching about how can you improve this for the future to give people a reason for optimism.
So I'm trying to find the exact quote from Fickle. I know the collection of words. Oh, here it is. Okay. This was kind of your worst nightmare, to be overtaken, manhandled, and dominated, especially in the second half. So a fan might hear that or read that, Jesse, as I'm reading it now, and think, well, he's just being honest. Well, yes, he is. But you very rarely ever hear a coach use those words. Like, a coach will not use words like that to describe their own team or their own performance unless they absolutely have to. Did Luke Fickell have no other choice but to describe this game this way? I just saw those words and I'm like, wow, that's a coach that I didn't even know what to think about it because the coach won't say those things hardly ever if they don't have to.
Here's the problem, Grant. He said something similar on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
Because they lose a lot of games like this. He used the word embarrassed after they lost to Northwestern last season. He said, if you haven't had your behind, and I am not using the exact word because we're on the radio,
Yeah.
whooped before you just did. And he said that after they lost to Alabama by the same 42-10 margin. And the thing I keep coming back to, I know we're 22 games into his tenure, at least since he's put his full staff into place and last season started, and there's more time to come. But tell me the best win that Luke has as the Wisconsin head coach. Probably a win last year at rival Minnesota in the regular season finale against the Gophers team that finished with the losing record and only reached a bowl game on the strength of their academic progress rate. You can try and find another decent win, and there aren't any. I think Rutgers last season was the only team with a winning record. South Dakota's a top 5 FCS team. They destroyed a Rutgers team that hasn't won a game for more than a month. So, there just aren't very many quality wins, and yet there are multiple embarrassing losses now. And that is just so problematic for, I think, the spirit of the team and the program and the fan base, because Wisconsin was just not in this type of place for so long. And it just feels like they brought Luke Fickell in because they were backsliding, and it really hasn't gotten any better.
Well, you mentioned that at the beginning of, I don't remember which episode of the camp it was from this week with Zach, but you said there have now been more embarrassments under Luke Fickell than quality wins. And you were kind of hinting at it, like there might not even be that great of a quality win, let alone multiple. And there have been multiple embarrassments. Here's what's frustrating is if you lose to Iowa the way that they did last year, and I don't remember the exact score, but it was close. And that was a game that was, it was just a brutal struggle that Iowa eventually won. I don't even know where you start after this, Jesse. And they have a bye, and it's like, okay, you can go into the bye and get things cleaned up. That's not a performance that you clean up. I don't even know where they go after this. It feels like they're back to square one.
Well, here's the good news. They're about to play number 1 Oregon, so I'm sure it gets easier from here.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, there's just nothing positive you can say about a 42-10 loss against Iowa, and that's part of what Luke was saying, that this is the first time I felt this. And he said, even after the Alabama game, it wasn't the same thing. Iowa, it's just different. And a year ago, they lost 15-6, and there were circumstances that at least contributed to that, like, Tanner Mordecai breaking his throwing hand late in the second quarter.
Yep.
So Braden Locke's got to play his first meaningful snap. What's your excuse now? I know you don't have Tyler Van Dyke, but you haven't had him since the third week of the season. You're just not even competitive with a team that is supposed to be. Let's be real. You look at the schedule this season, and this was really the most legitimate, I think, mile marker of where the program is. I know we've said that about a lot of other opponents. Alabama's clearly on another level. It's not like they've beaten Penn State in the last decade. USC is a game they should have won, and clearly the Trojans have stunk since then. But Iowa is a true measuring stick because you play them every year. You had programs that were so similar. You've recruited the same types of players. It's physical smash mouth football. And at least for the previous decade, they pretty much dominated Iowa starting with about 2010 on, or figured out a way to win close games. And they just weren't even close. The defense gave up 329 yards rushing, which is completely astounding to me when you knew exactly what Iowa was going to do. They had almost no passing game. They had a backup quarterback starting who threw 10 passes. They ran it more than 50 times and shoved it right down your throat. It's just, I don't know if I have the words for where it feels like this Wisconsin program is right now. And I know people listening are probably feeling like I sound super pessimistic, but that's because that is how I feel right now, having to watch this so often.
Yeah, well, and you said you don't know if you have the words. I don't know if I have the questions. Like at one point I thought, should I ask Jesse about Cade Yakimelli's usage or lack thereof? And I'm like, what's the point? Like what is the point of even talking about that? Like they gave up 330 rushing yards to a team that they knew was going to be rushing. And Jesse, one of the things that came out of that 3-game winning streak where they had at the time I considered to be a nice win. I'm a beggar can't be a chooser, and I wasn't going to be choosy about that win over Rutgers, and then a nice performance in Evanston, a place where they've struggled. I'm like, it seems like the defense is toughening up. Yeah, it's not about against A+ competition, but it's toughening up. If Iowa blows your doors off in the first quarter, okay, like that's what Iowa does. They're a physical running team. What my concern is, Fickell is a defensive guy, Tressel his coordinator. At no point in that game were they able to go, okay, this is something we got to adjust to. Here's what we're going to do. It just continued wire to wire. And that's so, so concerning when you look at coaching and the way that they're running this.
I go back to what Mike Tressel said when he was hired, and then maybe this will follow him. I don't know. It's just the thing that I think of when he said that he planned to, quote, mesh the elite, end quote, between what worked for Jim Leonard at Wisconsin and what worked for Tressel while he was at Cincinnati. And it's like, we've been waiting for 2 seasons to see that. Now, if you look statistically, they rank 6th nationally in pass defense. But to me, that's because they played several poor passing offenses. And the best quarterbacks that they faced have shredded them. I mean, Jalen Milroe, we saw what happened. He threw 3 touchdown passes. Miller Moss just got benched at USC, and yet against Wisconsin threw 3 touchdowns and more than 300 yards, and even one half of Drew Aller. Those 3 quarterbacks alone have completed 70% of their passes against Wisconsin with 7 touchdowns and 1 interception. So it's like they face quality competition and they don't play well. And the run defense, certainly aided by a terrible performance against Iowa, now ranked 92nd in the country. It's like, I don't know what you can hang your hat on. And it did feel like for 3 games, you can feel good about something and maybe they're turning the corner. And that was a legitimate storyline because all you can do is base it on what Wisconsin has done on the field. But then they go out and play good teams again, and they can't close the deal against Penn State. At least they're close, and they get embarrassed against Iowa. So it makes you wonder what they have left in the tank here for the last 3 regular season games, because it's not like it's going to get easier.
No, and it's not getting easier in years to come too, right? This is the new reality in the Big Ten. And by the way, Iowa didn't just arrive here. It's not like, oh, we gotta figure out this Iowa team's getting a real problem. They've been playing this team, and Iowa's been this team for years and years and years. And I know Luke Fickell's relatively new, but Iowa is one of the most known brands and products and styles of playing college football. I just don't know. To your original point at the beginning of this call, Jesse, because I don't want to completely lose this in the shuffle. I think we can lose it a little bit, but they're 5-4. And if you would have told me at the beginning of the year, well, Tyler Van Dyke's going to get hurt against Bama, he'll be out for the year, and they'll be 5-4, I'd probably look at their schedule and think, yeah, that actually sounds about right. Okay. But it's the way that it's looked. Like if I would have told you before the season, they'll be 5-4, what would you have envisioned and how would it have been different than what we've seen so far? Do you get that question?
So that part you're right on with, Grant, because when Zach and I went through our picks before the season, I said they would go 7-5, and through 9 games, I would have said, well, I did 5-4 with these exact 4 losses. I didn't think they would beat any of the teams that they have lost to, but it does come back to the way they've played. Nobody on their bingo card had 42-10 to both Alabama and Iowa, and nobody had 2 touchdown wins in the first 2 games of the season. I get that South Dakota is like a championship contender, but that's in the FCS. And so it's just, yeah, what they did in the 3-game winning streak, it felt like old school Wisconsin because they finally went out and dominated teams that they were supposed to dominate. And like, to me, that's the baseline level of expectation for where Wisconsin ought to be. And a lot of that has to do with what our expectation has been for the last decade plus. So sometimes you're at the mercy of what people think should happen. I acknowledge that. But like, you got to beat the teams you're supposed to beat. You got to try and win some games people don't believe you can win, and then be competitive in those like marquee matchups. It just feels like they're nowhere close. So it's hard not to look at it from that perspective, but you're right. They lost their starting quarterback on the first series of week 3, and they've had a backup quarterback the rest of the way. And obviously they've got a lot of other issues, and yet they're still 5-4. So it could be worse. It just feels so much worse than it is because of the way they played, especially Saturday night.
Do you think it's unfair to be left wanting with Braden Locke, considering, well, he's right there in camp, right, with Tyler Van Dyke? He was a guy that they recruited. He should be able to play a little bit more than this. He shouldn't be turning the ball over on this level, right? I'm not being too much of a needy fan considering they're playing a backup on this, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. And I know maybe Phil felt that he had to say this, but I also think he believed this in the preseason. He said, like, if we had to go with Braden Locke as our starter, we would be happy with that because he felt that Braden did a lot of good things in the preseason. Now, again, maybe you feel you have to say that because you might need him given Tyler Van Dyke's injury history and just how things play out over the course of the season. But I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for more than what you're being given from Braden Locke. Now, some of this is, well, what legitimately is his ceiling? I mean, is he a 50, 53% completion percentage quarterback? Is that just who he is? But 9 turnovers in your 6 starts. You've thrown at least 1 interception in every game you've started. You have 8 interceptions. You lost a fumble. Obviously, you had a terrible pick 6 against Penn State that lost you the game. And you threw 2 interceptions against Iowa where you threw into coverage or didn't see a guy. It's happened repeatedly. And so I would say Braden, and you have to start there. Like, he expects better of himself, and that's at least a good starting point. But there's a difference between everyone's talking about how intelligent you are and how much you understand the playbook and going out and executing consistently at a high level when the bullets are flying. And we just have not seen that from Braden very often.
Lastly, in your conversations with Fickell and any other coaches that you've spoken to, I don't want to ask you, are they pressing? Because of course they are, but have you heard any changes in messaging or approach from Fickell, especially after this loss now?
Well, we haven't had a chance to talk to Luke, obviously, since the Iowa game ended because they're on a bye week, so there's no media availability. We'll talk to him for the next time on Monday, but so far, no. I mean, he says the same talking points repeatedly. I mean, he talked about how he calls it an incredible mountain to climb, and he said that on multiple occasions. But at a certain point, it doesn't really matter what you say.
Of course.
You've got to go out and perform. And so it's a lot of the same talking points that we hear. I imagine it's a lot of the same stuff that he's telling the players. And it's probably hard as a player when you don't see the results, because at a certain point, I think you just kind of tune stuff out. Yep. The results aren't showing.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess I don't know what I was driving at that question other than, well, Fickell did this one thing differently. I just start to wonder, because I cannot imagine. I know last year was a surprise for Luke Fickell, and you've talked about how he admitted, I overestimated this team. I misjudged this team. I wonder how this year has gone relative to his expectations, because I got to think the record is one thing. The performances completely are another, to your point, Jesse. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your coverage. Enjoy your bye weekend, however you're spending it. And we'll read your stuff at The Athletic and hear you on the campus. Zach, thank you. Always.
Will do. Thanks, Grant.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Wisco Sports Show. There he goes, Jesse Temple of The Athletic. Listen to him on the camp, too. Him and Zach are an electric duo. And they've needed to be at times this season because this Badgers team gave us a nice 3-game stretch. Rutgers, Purdue, and who's the other one? Northwestern. You can tell how memorable that 3-game winning stretch is. I can't even remember the third team. And look, I thought that 3-game stretch was a nice step for the program. I'm not going to retroactively take that 3-game stretch away from them. But as we've talked about with Jesse repeatedly, and I think Zach has echoed this, and whether it's Nick Osen or Colton Bartholomew or any one of the members of the very great, friendly, accommodating Badgers beat, because they're all excellent and always willing to come on the show. They've said, okay, so you hung tough with Penn State, or last year you hung tough with Ohio State, or you won 3 in a row between Rutgers, Purdue, and Northwestern. Okay, what do you do with it? We're trying to make progress here. We're trying to get, so you had a nice moment. Okay. Is that just going to be a nice moment that's quickly forgotten, as evidenced by my inability to recall the Northwestern game? Or is that a stepping stone towards something bigger? And now after watching what happened against Iowa, especially, the Penn State game is whatever. Okay, so they played them close. Nice. I gave you my Penn State take. If you're not going to win that game, then when are you ever going to win a big game? But it's this Iowa game. That's the type of performance that gets a coach fired. Except Luke Fickell was brought in to replace the coach that was fired after that type of performance. And I think that loss to Illinois, not as bad as Saturday's loss to Iowa. I don't think I'm talking out of school. I don't think that's me being dramatic. Hour number 2, your calls. Packers, Badgers next. We got a half hour to chat. Let's do it. 2-minute update.
This is a Wisconsin Sports Zone update.
Well, edge rusher Preston Smith's time with the Packers has come to an end. Yesterday, before the NFL's trade deadline, GM Brian Gutekunst traded away the linebacker to the Steelers for a 2025 7th-round pick. Gutekunst also met with the media yesterday and was asked if he likes the depth for his defense.
That can change in a hurry. You know what I mean? And that's whenever you move off a player like Preston Smith, you're a couple injuries away from him. That may not have been the best thing, but at the same time, I really do like our depth. We got to continue to come together as a football team and play better football at times. But we're 6-3. I think we're in a good spot. I'm excited about the second half of the season and see how these guys grow together.
The Packers are now on their bye. They sit 6-3 on the year. That's good for third in the NFC North, and will come back to action on the 17th to take on the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field. Also on their bye week would be the Wisconsin Badger football team. They'll host number 1 Oregon next Saturday for a 6:30 kick under the lights at Camp Randall.
Actor portrayal.
When I joined Better Life, I thought it was just about life insurance, but it's so much more. Better Life connects me with others in my community through social groups, events, and wellness programs. Insurance helps give me peace of mind, but the member benefits, they give me a real sense of belonging.
Better Life Insurance, where better means belonging. Call 888-488-4136. Insurance issued by Better Life Insurance Company. Terms and conditions apply. Member benefits are subject to change. Contact a licensed agent for details.
Despite losing 6 straight and sitting 1-6 on the year, the Milwaukee Bucks say they're not panicking. Damian Lillard says they have the pieces, and head coach Doc Rivers says they have the answer in-house.
This is the team I think we have. We can't be scared to put different guys in, even try different lineups, because I think we have enough guys that will be able to do that.
The Bucks will host the Utah Jazz tomorrow at 7 o'clock. And finally, the Wisconsin Badger basketball team, they're in action tomorrow night against Montana State at the Kohl Center. For the Wisconsin Sports Zone Network, I'm Ebo.
It's not a story you can go in and just pick and choose, those guys got to be available, and there just wasn't a ton available this year. So we always look at a lot of things, have some conversations, talk to people. Not a lot materialized this year.
This is where Wisconsin gathers to talk sports. Packers, Brewers, Badgers, Bucks. The Wisco Sports Show is on the air. Now, here's your host, Grant Bills.
Not to be like ESPN, the 4-letter network, and bring up the Dallas Cowboys, but maybe some of you saw earlier this week on Fox Sports 1, James Jones kind of blasted Dak Prescott, accusing him of quitting on the team because Dak has a hamstring injury and he went on IR. And James Jones' point was, you're not a wide receiver. You're not a running back where you need to be hitting top speed. Give it a week or two and try to come back and play a little limited, you're a quarterback. Your team needs you. You can sit in the pocket a little hampered, right? Quarterbacks do it all the time. And I thought that was an interesting take. I think it's always tough as a sports broadcaster to claim that a player is quitting or a player has no heart. It's just really difficult to tell. I think sports commentators and analysts, we can have a good time and we can take shots at players for this and that. It's always really difficult to say that player quit because you just don't know. There's so many things you don't know, but some of you may have seen that take about Dak Prescott earlier this week. Jane Slater, this is 3 minutes ago, tweeted this. As the Cowboys weigh in on Dak Prescott's IR status, sources tell me the initial diagnosis is a partial avulsion, of course, of his hamstring tendon, which is partially torn off the bone. I'm told it typically takes more than a 4-week recovery. In some cases, they let it scar over, repair, and strengthen. With that being said, Prescott is seeking other options, which is why there is currently a reluctance to place him on IR or make any other determination about a timeline for return. So I thought he was going on IR. You know why? Because Jerry Jones said he was going on IR. But of course, Jerry Jones said he'd be going on IR without actually knowing whether or not he'd go on IR. I just thought that was an interesting tidbit because when you have a former NFL player on TV, I'm not going to act like I believe their show is called. I actually can't remember what it's called. James Jones is on. Is that the show with Joy Taylor and others? It's not like The Boardroom. It's Kevin Durant. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to FS1 because I really like First Things First. I like Cowherd. But anytime you have someone coming out and saying, yeah, that player quit, it's not like your hamstring's torn off the bone. And then Jane Slater, who's as connected to the Cowboys as just about anybody, comes out and said, actually unrelated, but the hamstring's torn off the bone. So I thought I'd pass that along. The Cowboys are baked. I really want them to play Trey Lance. Like, let me see Trey Lance. The dude was a top 3 pick. He's gotten to play like 3 career games because of injuries and because the Niners were just done with him. And maybe he sucks, but for entertainment value, I'd rather have that over Cooper Rush. I can tell you that much. It's the Wisco Sports Show. We are a half hour away. Matthew Coller, Purple Insider, will be here. He wrote an excellent story today, and you can find it on his Substack if you just search Purple Insider, or he's on Twitter at Matthew Coller, Coller spelled Coller, about the trade deadline and the lack of movement, the lack of, I guess, stomach or the lack of appetite from lesser teams to sell players, right? He writes about Adam Thielen, Jadeveon Clowney, Miles Sanders, all in Carolina, the Giants with Azeez Ojulari, who was a player I thought maybe the Packers. Darius Slayton, wide receiver that they could have sold off. The Raiders didn't trade Adam Butler. The Patriots have a couple guys. I think the Patriots probably less likely. Like, they have a rookie head coach. Like, they can't just be selling off the whole farm. The franchise will implode upon itself. But Jonathan Jones, KJ Osborne, those players probably make more sense than someone like Christian Gonzalez, who's probably one of their building blocks. Tennessee didn't move Sebastian Joseph Day. I mean, Jeffrey Simmons might just be one of the best defensive tackles in football. I think I'd still rather take Dexter Lawrence with the Giants, who the Giants also probably should have been interested in selling. Like, what are the Giants even doing? I commend general managers for drawing a line somewhere and being like, look, I know we're rebuilding, but we got to have some good players. Like, we can't just stick a massive middle finger to our fans and sell off every player that's halfway decent because draft picks, we're rebuilding. That's how you lose and completely burn a winning culture, and it's really hard to get it back once you lose it. So what the Browns did for years, it's like, well, we'll just trade everybody. We'll get all the picks. Yeah. But then when the players are actually drafted and they're there, you need to do something with them. You burn a winning culture or whatever culture is left in places like Carolina or Tennessee or Vegas. Like, I commend general managers for being like, look, we'll sell on the right price and we'll listen on some players, but we can't just give every player away because picks, we're rebuilding. I like that. There's got to be a medium ground between analytics or what's sharp, what's progressive in terms of team building. Analytics probably isn't the right word, but sharp, progressive team building versus, hey, we don't want to stick a middle finger to our fans. I like finding common ground in the middle. I like finding a happy medium. And I actually think a lot of teams in the league did that yesterday. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Hey, good evening, Grant. Happy American Day of Sorrow or Day of Rejoicing, depending on who you are.
Darnell, I saw your tweet saying, what did you say? You're feeling very unburdened by what has been? You tweeted, feeling slightly unburdened by what has been, RN, honestly. It's a funny tweet.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's true. I do feel slightly unburdened by what has been today. I don't really know what that means, but definitely feeling that way.
Politics aside, I was happy that I could go to bed reasonably early. I was in bed at 11 and looking at Twitter, I'm like, I feel like I know where this is going. And then I woke up and I'm like, okay, it's done. And we've moved on. And if nothing else, I very much appreciate that about this election.
No, I mean, honestly, I was not calling to talk about politics at all. I will say one thing, and that is that if you really care about politics, please, I implore everyone, do your research on your local elections and find out about your state senators and your state assemblymen and the people that actually represent you here in Wisconsin, as opposed to the people that are making decisions for
school board too. Like
Yeah,
I made sure, and there were some names on my ballot. I'll be 100% honest. I'm like, I'm not sure. I don't know these candidates, intimately, but I'm going to vote, with my best judgment on party lines. The school board, like with certain referendums, for example, the local school board where I vote was wanting to spend money on a bunch of things, and I voted no on everything because if those kids want nice things, they can go to private school. I didn't do that. I voted yes. Money for school is always a good thing, but yes, you were correct. Local elections always, Darnell, and that is a message that is important to share. Now, the day after the election, Darnell, thank you. We could have used this message yesterday, but thanks for sharing this.
Well, for future reference, right?
Okay,
right?
Sure.
Yeah. So next, groundbreaking and whatever election, then you vote for
democracy defining. Democracy defining. Yes.
Well, it dies in darkness.
That's
Grant.
true. That's true. We learned that from. I love how we have a Star Wars quote and a Harry Potter quote so far. This is great.
Perfect. Anyways, the other thing that dies in darkness is Badger football. I didn't say much about this on Monday, but look, I think that they need to. I think that they need to move on from Braden Locke. I think that's a necessity.
Okay.
But I don't want to see them do that against Oregon. I really don't. I think you need. I don't think you throw a true freshman in against the number one team in his first start at home. Like I don't think that that's fair to a brand new quarterback. Does that make sense?
Do you think maybe Matoyer is capable of starting? Who's the worst remaining team on their schedule? Nebraska? Minnesota's playing okay. But then again, Nebraska,
right?
But they hung in there with Ohio State. Like I get your line of thinking. We are past the cupcake point of this schedule, though. I don't think Matower is going to play at all, but I understand why fans are like, why are we doing this with Braden Locke? This dude blows.
Well, but the question is, and I guess the question that the Badger fans have to ask themselves is this guy the future? And that by that I mean like next year's quarterback. If he's next year's quarterback, then great, keep him going, and let's try and put a couple of wins together or put a couple of strong performances together so that this guy has a little bit of momentum going into next year, right? Because we're not really playing for this year anymore. We're playing to get a bowl game, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I would like to beat Nebraska and Minnesota. Like in that sense, we're playing for this year. I'd like to win those games if that's what you're getting at.
Yes, Grant. I want to still win the games. I'm saying that there's no chance at a college football playoff or a upper tier bowl anymore.
Okay.
That's not going to happen. It's not in the cards. They've lost too many games at this point. So as a program builder, like you do on college football 25, right? As a program builder, you have to look to next year every single time. You're always looking to next year. You're always recruiting for next year.
Okay.
Even though you should be focused on this year, right? But nope, we're looking forward to next year. And who is going to be your quarterback next year? I think they really do have to ask themselves that question, because if it's going to be someone that's not even on the roster right now, then fine. Don't keep playing Braden Locke. That's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. But if it's going to be someone that's on the roster that isn't currently playing, I'd like to see them get a little bit of in-game experience prior to getting thrown to the fire next year.
Do you think that let's say that their goal is to start maybe Matoyer next year. Does he need to play at all this year? Does that benefit? Can't he potentially take the field week 1 next year without any previous game experience? I don't know that it's additive for him to go out there and get his ass kicked this year, so he's ready for next year. I don't know if those two things are connected. So just help me clean and fill in those gaps.
I mean, high school football is super different from college football, especially Big Ten college football, right?
Agreed.
So sometimes going out there and just getting your ass kicked for a game or two, it will open the eyes of the quarterback to be like, okay, well, I definitely need to improve on I need to really, really work on my footwork this year. I really need to get stronger in my upper body or maybe my lower body. I got dragged down for 3 sacks that I probably should have gotten out of, right?
Okay.
Little things like that maybe they can figure out right now so that we're not doing the feeling out process against South Dakota next year.
Oh, God. I'm already
You know what I'm
pissed.
saying?
I'm already pissed about next year's South Dakota game. I haven't even watched it yet. Is that game's in South Dakota, right? Are they going to? No, that wouldn't be. No,
I have no idea if they actually play South Dakota next year. I'm just saying that, like, let's not try and figure it out against an FCS school, right? I'm a fan of working ahead and trying to be on the precipice of things, but whatever.
All right. No, I get what you're thinking, Darnell. The Badgers do have to answer this question sooner rather than later. Okay. Appreciate the call. Do we want Tyler Van Dyke back next year? I'm kind of over Braden Locke. Like I don't. Well, with one more year experience and then a full off season as the number one. Like, what in Braden Locke's game right now is an off season away from becoming a winning quarterback in this Big Ten? Throws too many picks. That's not footwork related. That's not mechanics related. That's a boneheaded decision-making problem. And if they could coach bonehead decision-making out of him on any level, we would have seen it so far. I'm not saying that, well, if they could coach him, they'd turn him into prime Patrick Mahomes in the middle of the year. No. I'm just like, can you take away the worst interceptions? He hasn't shown the ability to do that. It's the same player every week. So how am I to believe, well, if you give him number one reps all offseason, well, then he'll be, no, because he's had number one reps now for extended run last year. He had a lot of reps this offseason in camp and albeit probably manufactured quarterback battle, it was still a quarterback battle, a quarterback competition. And now he's gotten weeks to have number one reps and he just keeps throwing picks. Oh yeah. And when he throws a back-breaking pick 6 against Penn State, he comes out after the game's like, yeah, I saw him. Okay. So you're as bad of a press conference speaker as you are a quarterback, and it's not getting better. So I think I'm done with the Braden Locke experience. The question is, do we want Tyler Van Dyke back? Or are we going forward with maybe Mettauer? Or is it someone else? I don't know that I need another version of maybe Mettauer, or who did they have last year? Tanner Mordecai. I don't know that I want to do that guy for the third year. At some point, somebody who's been recruited and targeted by this program needs to take over, and you would hope get a couple of years like, hey, this is your program now. Let's have a good first year. We'll build on that in a second year and maybe even a third or a fourth, God willing, right? And maybe that's not Mettauer, but if it's not Mettauer, then he's probably gone if he's not starting next year, because that's how college football works. And that's fine if you have a better option. They do need to figure out what their future plan is at quarterback. I am not with you, Darnell, in that if Mettauer is the starter next year, I don't know that he necessarily should go out there this year and experience what it's like to get his butt kicked. I don't think that's additive. I don't think you need to play to develop. If that was the case, Braden Locke would be developing, and he's not. So I don't know what they're going to end up doing at quarterback. I would like to think it's Mettauer. That was someone that they targeted. That was a nice get for them once upon a time. Tyler Van Dyke's getting another year, but I don't know that I want to run it back with Tyler Van Dyke. Vagabond John on the stream says, you think there's a 3-year quarterback in this era? Hell no. Why not? Why wouldn't there be? You're going to have to explain it to me, Vagabond John. Why wouldn't there be a 3-year quarterback in this era? Would they transfer after a year? Let's say they start 1 year, they have a nice year 1. They get a nice win or 2, they have a bad loss or 2, and you're like, all right, this is a guy with a little development. He can grow. He can kind of shepherd and steward this program moving forward. And then they have a much better year 2. Wow. Real strides. Why wouldn't they be back for a 3rd year? Go chase more. Now you could say a bigger program is going to try to poach him for that 3rd and 4th year for NIL money. Maybe that's what you mean. I don't know. I'd like to think that a guy could settle in for a little bit. Maybe that's only 2 years, but I'd prefer for it to be 2 over 1, especially if the 1 is going to be injury riddled as it's been with Mordecai and Van Dyke. And Van Dyke's got an injury history. So that makes me even a little more skeptical of bringing him back next year for whatever would be like his 6th or 7th year, something ridiculous in college football. 608-321-1670. I find it hilarious that we're talking Badgers football right now. Just awful. Although we've hit the trade deadline. I think we've covered all our bases with the trade deadline. So why not? Let's talk Tyler Van Dyke, maybe Mettauer next year. Why not? Braden Locke. I'm out on Braden Locke. I am out on Braden Locke. You sell me on, well, if he gets a full offseason, okay, well, then what have we been doing the last 2 seasons? Because it's been bad, followed by another bad game, followed by another bad game, and boneheaded picks throughout. Never any progression, never any growth. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
The year or the era of the 3-year quarterback is done.
I'm not saying 4 or 5 year. I'm saying 3. Are you saying because after a good second year, then that quarterback would be poached by a better school with more money? Is that what you're saying? Chucky Hepburn, if you will?
Correct. And
Okay.
I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Like, I think I'm with you on the logic. It shouldn't, right? But you can point to like a Bo Nix at Auburn.
Sure.
Right. Where even if you're decent, even if you're a quality starter, and I know that Oregon fans right now are yelling, he sucked, or Auburn fans are yelling, he sucked. But, even if you're a quality starter, there's going to be so much money thrown at you if you're a 2-year starter in the Big Ten that I think it's going to be really hard. And I think that's probably my least favorite part of this era that we're entering in college football. But I think that's why fundraising is so important. And that's the one take that I wanted to share from my experience at Iowa, if you'll give me a minute. The pregame festivities that focused so exclusively on NIL fundraising in and around the stadiums were incredible. It would be like if every bar on Regent Street had speakers, former athletes. The athletic director of the University of Iowa was in a bar drinking a beer with the fans, and they were all having this collective experience. And they were doing raffles, and they're selling their version of Varsity Golden Ale, which looks like canned wine, but that's a marketing problem that they have.
Man, you're just on the case of graphic designers for everything involved with the Varsity Collective. And I like it. Keep their foot to the fire. Someone's got to hold them accountable because I don't care enough. I'm glad you do.
Well, yeah, and I like Arcane. I think Arcane is classic, and I think Arcane actually represents what the Varsity Golden Ale should be.
Are you saying Narcan? It sounds like you're saying Narcan, Vagabond John.
Well, we need more of that on the streets,
Yeah,
especially after. Well, anyways, yeah, I just was so impressed at the University of Iowa in terms of what they had going on in and around it. And I think, when we're talking about the future, when we're talking about who's going to be the next quarterback, I think money is so important. And that's what kind of blew me away. I didn't expect Iowa to be the program that had their crap together when it came for fundraising. But the amount of presence that my mother-in-law is an Iowa grad. She has a direct person from the NIL collective, and she's not a big donor. She just has tickets, and she goes to some events.
She's active. She's maybe top 10% of fans, which isn't a ton, but it's something. It's more than a lot of alums, to your point.
And she has a person from their collective that texts her on game day to get her into events, to come talk with the baseball, to come talk with the women's basketball team, and to come engage at a level that I've never seen at Wisconsin. And I know it happens, right? I know you have to get, but I think at Wisconsin, I guess what I've seen is you have to be in kind of the uppity booth. This is the equivalent of their Regent Street, right? This is in the bars amongst the people. And I think that's my pitch. Like, I think somebody at the Varsity Collective, all of them that are listening to the show, obviously listening to the show, get out there, get amongst the people, stop focusing. Maybe we can grassroots our way to a Cam Ward, but I share the same concerns with the quarterback position. I do think future planning in college football is also kind of just an interesting concept in itself, right? Especially after watching Indiana. I don't know that you need to build for 5 years anymore. I think that was true 10 years ago. I don't think that's true anymore, but you're going to need money to do any of it, and we got to do something.
I'm glad, Vagabond John, and I got to run. I appreciate the call. I'm glad that you are interested in the NIL side of this. And I'm glad that people are considering. And of course, Iowa's got it figured out. There's no school in the country that knows who they are like Iowa. Of course, they're good at. Iowa's, for the most part, good at everything on some level. And I hope you're interpreting that. Like, obviously, they're not some offensive juggernaut. And obviously, they're not contending for a national title. But like, Iowa's got it figured out. Okay. I would be more obsessed over NIL if Luke Fickell was achieving Greg Gard levels of success. Like, I watched Greg Gard last year and into this offseason. It's like, man, I think a really good program with a strong identity. They know what kind of basketball they want to play. They just don't have the money to keep Chucky Hepburn. I don't think the money's not the reason that Wisconsin just got clapped in Iowa City. These coaches don't have a friggin' clue. Mike Tressel and Luke Fickell, they got pounded for 320 yards by a team that doesn't throw. They're like, man, we got to sell more varsity ale. Like, that is so far off of my radar right now. Like, can you stop the run in Iowa City? Can you at least pretend to stop the run in Iowa City? Maybe then we can talk about, varsity collective reps. I hear your points, Vagabond John. I just don't have the stomach for it when I watch the product on Saturday night, and it's so insanely far away. That's a coaching thing. That's a football people thing. When all that improves, and I'm not holding my breath, then we can talk about the money and the finances and the off the field stuff, which I also don't know is that good right now for Wisconsin. 3 minutes. We'll continue the Wisco Sports Show next.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Wisco Sports Show. Those are champagne problems with Vagabond John. I love that he's passionate about it. And maybe if I was an alum and I was involved with athletics the way that Vagabond John was, maybe I would be too. I can't worry about the financing. To pick up right where we left off before break, I just can't worry about the financing and the NIL and like, how are we going to pay for this quarterback? Can we stop the run at Kinnick? Like, can we do the bare bones X's and O's football things necessary to win Big Ten games? I don't think they can. Like right now, I'm much more likely to spend money on a basketball player because I feel like when the player gets there, Greg Gard's going to have a clue with what to do with that player. I don't feel that way about Luke Fickell or Phil Longo or Mike Tressel right now. The football stuff is a joke. I care less about the NIL stuff. That's a champagne problem. 608-321-1670. Let's take a call and then we'll get to Matthew Coller on the other side of this break. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Eric on I-90.
Good evening, Eric.
Good evening, Grant. Hard charging.
Hard
on
charging.
Wednesday night.
Commuting now that it's dark earlier, it's rough, Eric. It's rough for guys like us.
No, it isn't. You just go with it. You embrace
Sure.
it.
Sure.
You
All right.
embrace it.
All right. I needed to
I
hear
get
that.
to look at the sunset, and I'm looking at a dandy. I can still see the sun setting over here. Nice, beautiful orange stripe right
Excellent.
across the horizon.
Excellent.
A little cloud bank.
I'm happy to hear it.
I can't even hardly describe it.
You're trying your best, though, it sounds like.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just kind of a week
Mm-hmm.
in football here, isn't it? I mean, the Vikings are going to go play the Jaguars.
How is that game not in London? You're telling me that game is a domestic game? That doesn't seem right or real.
It's a domestic game.
Yeah.
It can't get any. I mean, the only thing less boring is a bye.
Yeah.
We're going to go down and stomp the Jaguars in a domestic game.
Domestic game.
That's how that's going to go.
Trying to find the best game of the. I mean, San Francisco at Tampa Bay is interesting. Pittsburgh at Washington is interesting. Let's see. Who's the night game? Ooh, Detroit at Houston's interesting. That's the night game. Eagles Cowboys on CBS because, of course, we get to watch Cooper Rush in America's Game of the Week.
Did you see that Chicago receiver walk off the field during the play?
Yeah, so I brought this up to Bill earlier today, too. So DJ Moore, that receiver, was asked this week if the locker room had given up, or I guess he was asked specifically if Coach Eberflus, Matt Eberflus, had lost the locker room, and he says, I want to say no. That was that player's response.
Jeez.
Jeez is right.
I don't know. That was pretty bad. Cheese and rice. I suppose we could talk about Jordan Love's interceptions, but that's about as dead as this deer I just passed on the road.
Yeah, we could beat that dead horse.
He got hit by all 9 wheels.
Matt LaFleur only answered about 4 different questions about interceptions on Monday. Goody, much of the same yesterday.
I've been listening to Bill Michaels. You must be sitting there listening to the show, and I'm not going to make you answer. But you got to be like, please, God, can we stop talking about these interceptions?
Well, we have to. What else is there to talk about? I'm not a Packer fan that hides from the uncomfortable truth that our quarterback has a turnover problem right now.
Right now, but I think if you give patience, there's a quarterback who used to have that trouble, and his name is Kirk Cousins. But I don't know and he doesn't have that now. And he didn't have it his last years with the Vikings. But I don't know if you boys got enough patience for that.
Oh, patience.
It took a few years to work out.
Well, Eric, we're just we just have such high expectations of our quarterbacks in Green Bay. We expect a lot,
Well, why wouldn't you? It's like, Sam Darnold holds onto the ball a long time. Why wouldn't he? He hasn't learned. I mean, he's been able to do it.
Yeah.
He's been able to do it. And have success. So why would he stop?
And when things get tight, he can just uncork one to Jordan Addison or Justin Jefferson or now TJ Hawkinson. He's got the right coach for it, the right quarterbacks for it. Thank you, Eric. I'm just a little bit up against it. And we can talk more about the Vikings and the upcoming weekend slate. We'll do that tomorrow and Friday because the Packers don't play. What did he say? The only thing more boring is a bye. Yeah, some of the games that are most interesting this weekend are games that you wouldn't have necessarily thought would be interesting at the beginning of the year. Like week 1, I would be like, what I'm looking forward to is Pittsburgh and Washington. That's going to be a banger. But now that we're 9-10 weeks into the season, I'm interested. I'm excited to watch that game. We'll talk about that game, maybe, and the trade deadline. Matthew Coller, Purple Insider. Speaking of Eric's Vikings, Matt will join us next. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 5 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 4 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Wisco Sports Show, last couple of segments. Bill Michaels Huddle coming up in about 20 minutes, though. Mike Clemens going to join him, hear a conversation with Ryan Wood from the program earlier today. And the breaking news is not earth-shattering, but Preston Smith saying in Pittsburgh, yeah, I actually requested a trade, which isn't totally surprising. And I think he's in a better spot. The Packers get off his money. That deal makes sense. It hurts in a contention year to let go of a veteran and some pass rushing depth, but I understand it from both sides. Matthew Coller is here, Purple Insider. I was reading a story of his on his Substack about the trade deadline earlier today. I'm like, I wonder if he would come on. Matthew, how are you? It's Jaguars week. I was just talking with a caller who's a Vikings fan. This game seems like it should be in London. How is this a domestic game on Sunday?
These are the two most Londonified teams
in the NFL, I think. Yeah, this is one where it's hard to build the hype, I would say, when it comes to this. I mean, at least last week it was Sunday Night Football against Joe Flacco. So, next week, now that's going to be a big one. That's Titans, Vikings. Thank you, AFC South, for really, really ramping it up this year.
Well, and we have Malik Willis's success partly to thank, or I guess the AFC South partly to thank for. Hey, don't forget a storyline. Did they mention this, by the way, on Sunday Night Football last night? Gus Bradley, the pride of Zimbrota, Minnesota, isn't he? Did that go unremarked on Sunday night? I hope not.
I don't know. Because I was in the press box,
Of
but
course.
I don't think too many people were talking about it. He was the pride of leaving Justin Jefferson one-on-one with his corners, which was something the Vikings were thrilled about and kind of laughing about after the game. But, these teams, they're bad for a reason. Is there any worse collection of football teams or even pro sports teams in a single division than those three, than the three teams that the Vikings play in a row with Indianapolis, Jacksonville, and Tennessee? Each week, it's actually a storyline of how bad the other team is, how bad they're mismanaged, how clueless they are. I mean, how about Jacksonville trading their left tackle and then no one else? What?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because what? Because they played so great against Philadelphia and lost? I have no idea. Tennessee not trading anyone. What are you guys doing? You still in the hunt? I don't know. It's a weird division, but this is one where if you don't win this game, if you're the Vikings, it's one of those complete disaster bleep show type of losses.
Sure. And you talked about this in your column at Purple Insider too. A couple of those AFC South teams are mentioned, but you also mentioned the Giants as a team, or the Patriots, or the Panthers. Like, hey, you guys have some solid players. Why not trade those players away? Were you surprised that more, let's say, 3-win or fewer teams didn't trade off parts at this deadline yesterday?
Yeah, I was very shocked. I mean, I thought that we had gotten to a point in the NFL where these teams were accepting of their fate. Now, some of the lack of trades at the deadline was the fact that the trades were made before the deadline. The Vikings made 2 trades, but they just didn't make them on the day of the deadline. So it's a little bit different than maybe some years past. But when I look at certain franchises who are completely floundering and then they're wasting everybody's time by not trading away veterans that they could get anything for. I mean, even you never know when a 6th-round pick or something is going to turn into a guy, or is going to help you make a trade down the road, even if it's a conditional something, whatever. But like, just for example, I thought Calais Campbell would have been a great pickup for the Vikings, and the Miami Dolphins don't trade him. Why? Like, what exactly is it that you're trying to accomplish with Calais Campbell? Is it that they think that they're good or they can make the playoffs? Or, I mean, I guess maybe that's it. They tried to move the trade deadline back to facilitate some more trades, but maybe there's pressure from owners. That's always a thing where owners are like, no, we played a good game against the Bills last week. We can do it. The band's not going to make it, guys. Like, it's just not going to happen. Maybe they could get the 7th seed, but you're not a real team. The Giants especially, are they trying to save jobs? Do they really think they're going to win games down the stretch because they kept Azeez Ojulari as opposed to trading him for picks? I don't get it. In my column, I compared it to somebody who's moving out of town and still is trying to sell their old television for $100 at the yard sale. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I think that it's a lot of job saving. It's maybe some stubbornness from people. And, teams like the Vikings weren't able to get better at the deadline. So at the very least, the Vikings could argue, yes, we didn't get better, but who did? Washington? And that's about it.
Yeah.
Detroit?
So help me. So you have a book about Pro Football Focus. It's called Footballs is a Numbers Game. You are a very, let's say, progressive football mind, right? I think you're very much on the cutting edge. You're very sharp about, and modern, let's say, about the way you view this game. Modern team management would tell us, look, if you're not going anywhere, get a pick, right? You're rebuilding, get more value in the draft, accumulate more value, get more swings at taking young players. How do owners and general managers of a team, let's say Tennessee, like Jeffrey Simmons is awesome, you get a lot of value, or Carolina, you mentioned in your story, Thielen, Clowney, Sanders, those are players. How does a general manager and an owner walk the line of, we want to be sharp and progressive, about rebuilding, but we also don't want to give a complete and total middle finger to our fans. Like, we want to have something on Sundays, right? Like, how do you strike that balance? Or maybe you think that balance isn't worth striking.
Well, yeah, and it's not even just me. It's like every other sport that does this.
Yes.
I mean, any baseball team that has a guy who's going to be a free agent that they don't plan on re-signing. Adam Thielen's a great example. Why wouldn't he be in Buffalo? Why wouldn't he be in Kansas City today when he's a proven wide receiver? The only thing I can think of is that Carolina maybe wants to just give enough to evaluate Bryce Young around him, right? As opposed to just tearing it all the way down. Maybe that's it. Maybe, like you said, you want to lose and draft high, but you don't want to lose by 50 every week because you're playing a UFL team. I mean, I guess that's it. Other sports don't care, especially the NBA. I mean, they really don't care if their teams are an abomination, if they're doing the right thing long term. And most of the time, when your guys are playing poorly anyway, and you bring up somebody and give them a shot that may be on the bench, like, I don't know, fresh legs, like maybe they can perform just as well. We've kind of seen that through the years at times. But, I don't know. I think that there's also a lot of moving parts in football that exist, which is there's a lot of people who have to sign off on these things, including the owners, which I think are more involved in football than any other sport. They, I think, make a lot of the decisions in the league, or every decision from the GM has to be cleared with the owner. So, of course, the Indianapolis Colts should be selling because they stink, but you're never going to have Jim Irsay agreeing to that, right? He's going to want to fight to the end with this team. So I think that's part of it. Salary cap stuff is part of it. Certainly, if the Vikings could have gotten someone like Denzel Ward away from the Cleveland Browns, but can you fit him in the cap? Can you fit him in the long-term cap? And that's another part of it too, because if you just sign players in free agency and trade away picks all the time, this is something the Vikings are dealing with.
Yeah.
Then, your cap becomes pretty dicey at some point, unless you're going to hack the system with the rookie quarterback thing, which is what the Vikings plan on doing. But if the Vikings had traded away 5th round picks, they would have nothing for next year outside of 1 first rounder and literally nothing else if they had traded away their 5th rounders except for comp picks. So, and that's comp picks is another part of it too. If you can't get any more than a comp pick that you're going to get, why embarrass yourself?
Sure.
Why have everyone saying, oh, they gave away this guy for nothing? So I want to give the NFL some credit for this, but I also think that it is smarter long-term, especially for teams that don't plan on firing their general managers, to try to get everything they possibly can for the assets that they have.
Matthew Coller is your Purple Insider, and I agree, especially if the player's set to be a free agent, right? It's one thing if, hey, we really like this player, they're a cornerstone moving forward, we're just not good right now. We think we can be good in the future, but like if they're old and set to be a restricted or unrestricted free agent, like maybe Adam Thielen, like, all right, I get it. So the Packers traded Preston Smith. I don't really want to dwell on Preston Smith because it's not really a move that I think is going to make a massive difference, which is why the Packers did it. It's like, well, at the very worst, we'll probably be the same. And maybe some of the young guys will even help us get better and we clear some of that money. What do you think of that Packers pass rush? Because I've been underwhelmed by Gary. I was hoping for a bigger jump from Van Ness in year 2. I know it's not the team that you cover, but you're just so good at all this stuff. And it's in the same division. What have you thought of that Packers pass rush? Despite the turnovers, the pass rush has been a little lacking. It's left a bit to be desired.
See, with Preston Smith leaving, I feel like there were probably some cheers in Minnesota, even though he had become less of a part of that defense because it's a different system.
Yeah.
He was a pain in the butt for the Vikings for the entire time.
He's a good
that he was
Packer.
there, especially that combination of him and Zadarius Smith when those two were there. I think if Van Ness takes a step because of this, then he could be pretty dangerous. He's a very, very good athlete. Rashawn Gary, I still think should be viewed as one of the more dangerous players at the position. And the guy that it doesn't, Kenny Clark could be 46 years old and play 3 snaps. And if you played him against the Vikings, it would be 3 sacks.
Yep.
Like that guy is going to destroy the Vikings always and forever. So when the Vikings do play Green Bay again, I don't know, 4 months from now, when is it? At the end of the season? It's a really long time from now. I imagine it's still going to be a big discussion of the pass rush, but I think more than anything, just the system seems so much better. And you cover it on a daily basis, but the system seems so much better than it was before, where every game, especially in the Kirk era, Like, okay, well, this one's going to probably have a lot of points because that Packers system is going to allow the Vikings to run all over the place. I thought that there were some adjustments they made in the second half, especially against the Vikings in that game at Lambeau, which was kind of a weird one. But the adjustments in the second half really had the Vikings with some problems there. So I think it's a passable defense, it's a passable pass rush, but I don't think it's a complete game changer. Like, the offense is going to be what has to drive that situation into the playoffs.
What do I do with the Packers offense that can kind of just put up 400 yards by default, but they struggle to catch the ball and they commit a lot of penalties, and the output isn't what it should be given how well they can move the ball and how talented they are? Because now we're 9 games in. Like, this isn't a slow start or a quarterback that's been in and out of the lineup. This is kind of who they are. They're clunky on offense.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is the Vikings went through this as well with false starts and delay of games and things like that, some of the detail penalties. And sometimes I think that look, I think Matt LaFleur is an A-plus coach, and I think the same thing of Kevin O'Connell. So I'm not downgrading either one of these guys. But sometimes I think that when Malik Willis went in and they pared down the offense and still put up a ton of yards in one game, did anybody think, maybe it doesn't always have to be this hard on the players? Like, sometimes I think that simplifying a little bit from what you're asking everybody to do, that they put such a mental load on guys that they can't always play as fast or as easy as you want them to, because there's just a lot of thinking involved. And that's a tough balance, but I definitely think it's true for big brain offensive guys like LaFleur and Kevin O'Connell. I also think that the continuity there has to be a thing. You have to have Jordan Love in for many weeks in a row and not getting hurt in order to get that down, to get cadences down, and to get the rhythm with the wide receivers and things like that. I mean, I still look at the Green Bay offense as being very dangerous overall, but if you don't get into a rhythm because one week he's in, another week he ends up hurt, I just think that that's tough. Like, we're just seeing now midway through the season, Sam Darnold and the Vikings get on the same page. Seems like having to start the season, miss a couple games, come back while still banged up. It just would have been a lot. I think that Matt LaFleur will get those things resolved. But, the Vikings do have a little bit easier with number 18. Whatever is ailing your offense, you just huck the pigskin in his general direction. And Green Bay could talk about all they want. Well, we could throw it to everybody. That's great. But when Sterling Sharp was there, nobody was complaining about throwing to wide receiver 1 too much.
No, and same with Devontae Adams when it was working. We know the division. I think the Lions are the best team in the NFC. Packers and Vikings, I think, are both good, even though the Packers have had some warts and some messiness, some inconsistencies. 30 seconds. If you had to buy stock and do a championship contender, either the Eagles, the Niners, or the Commanders, Super Bowl team, which one would you go with at this moment in time?
Man, I really want to pick the Commanders. I really do. It's hard with a rookie quarterback, but I think they're the best coached and most complete. But maybe I just have to do that. Even though it's a rookie quarterback, they are legit. Their offense is super efficient, and I think they really improved their defense over the last few weeks and with Marshawn Lattimore. So they're the new shiny toy, but I'll go with them to finish with the best record out of those teams.
I kind of like that too. That's fun. Matthew Coller, I appreciate it. Enjoy the Jaguars game and enjoy not having to deal with the London part of this game, which, again, it seems like a London game, but enjoy the weekend. Thank you for the time.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Matthew Coller, Purple Insider, follow his work. And also get his book, Football is a Numbers Game. It's about PFF. It's very interesting, and it will make you smarter. Even I was capable of reading it, so I think it's digestible by anybody. 3 minutes. We'll come back, wrap up the show, turn things over to the Bill Michaels Huddle at 6 o'clock.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Last couple minutes of the Wisco Sports Show. Appreciate Matthew Coller. Great friend of the show and of the network. Always a willing guest. I texted him earlier today because I was reading his story about the trade deadline. I challenged myself to just not go on Twitter today. Just there's too many people making a big stink about the election. It's like, I don't want to deal with it. So I did it the old fashioned way. I went to theathletic.com and the Journal Sentinel, and I went to Coller's Substack. I'm like, I'm just going to read. I was reading the story. I'm like, this is really interesting. It's going to drive a lot of the conversation on tonight's show, I think, assuming nothing crazy happens, no breaking news or anything. So I just messaged him. I said, hey, can you come on tonight? Like, you got anything going on? Because in my brain, it's bye week. How could anyone have anything going on? But I forgot the Vikings play this week. He's like, well, I have the Vikings locker room, and then I got a Jaguars hit, but I could do 5:30. I'm like, well, you don't, if you got a lot going on, you don't need to. He's like, no, I'm good. So I always appreciate him. Always wants to talk ball. And that's true of a lot of football people. Like, hey, anytime, anywhere. I don't even really care what team we're talking about. I'm in. He's got a point about some teams. I like for general managers and owners to strike a fair balance between future team building and wanting to be competitive. Like, I think Patriots fans, Panthers fans, Titans fans, Giants fans, they're owed certain considerations, let's say. Like, I want the owner and general manager thinking, well, we could trade away all these guys. We're not any good. But we got to have some good players. Ryan Russillo always says this on his podcast. Like, you got to have somebody on your team. You can't just trade away everybody. So, like, I understand, like, let's say Dexter Lawrence on the Giants, who's maybe the best defensive tackle in football. I understand the Giants not trading him away, even though he might be super valuable to another team and worth a ton, and the Giants aren't going anywhere. I get that, though. That's kind of a middle finger to your fans. But Adam Thielen, who's on an expiring contract, you can't give him away for a 4th-round pick to a team. Chiefs would love to have Adam Thielen. Okay, they want to evaluate Bryce Young. I get that. That makes sense. The Patriots definitely should have dealt KJ Osborne, and, Tennessee has Sebastian Joseph Day. Again, the Titans, they stink, but Jeffrey Simmons is awesome. Are they not allowed to have Jeffrey Simmons? Like, he's really good. Okay, I get that. I think general managers and owners need to strike that balance. Future team building, right? Progressive, forward-thinking decisions, centered around draft capital. But also, like, we can't just get rid of everybody. Some of these teams probably should have. If I was a Giants fan, I'd be like, you know what? Burn the whole freaking thing down. I don't care. We're on like year 6 of this crap post Eli Manning. You have no clue what's going on. Still don't know if we have the right coach. Still don't know if we have the right general manager. Oh, Andrew Thomas is hurt. I guess that's the reason the entire thing stinks. right? We're still running Daniel Jones out there. If I was a Giants fan, I'd be like, why are we still doing this? We know he's not good, and we've known for 3 years. The only reason that he got that deal and got a second year is because he lit up the Vikings and looked like Steve Young in the playoffs. And even that moment, we're like, well, I guess we'll see. And then 2 weeks into his first contract year of that deal, it's like, oh yeah, this isn't the guy. And here we are, getting close to a year and a half, getting closer to 2 full seasons later, and he's still there. We're still running him out there. Like, what are we even trying to do? So I would almost appreciate the sweet release of death if I was a Giants fan. Panthers fan, I don't know. I don't know what I'd think. But if you want to get an honest to goodness fair look at Bryce Young down the stretch, keeping Adam Thielen there after you already traded away Jonathan Mingo, I guess makes sense. Lesson be learned. There are no easy answers when you're a terrible team. So try to avoid being terrible, right? And the Browns are probably the best example. Well, we're rebuilding. We'll trade everybody. We'll even acquire bad players if it helps us get picks. Okay. But then once you get the picks, you need to be able to pick the right players. And then if you pick the right players, you need to bring them into an environment that's conducive to winning. And if you tear it down too many times, if you rip it down to the studs 2 or 3 years in a row, it's really hard to get the right culture and the right approach and the right attitude back. Once it's gone, it's really hard to get back, which is why I can appreciate the Packers' approach of, even when we're in between quarterbacks, we're not losing it. We're not going to the bottom of the barrel, because once you're down there, it's one thing to get good picks and good players. It's another to turn those good picks and good players into something once again. And I think that's the biggest hang up for most teams that try to rebuild. Bill Michaels Huddle, Mike Clemens, Brian Gutekunst, Ryan Wood, all coming up over the next 2 hours. Bill will make some picks as well. The rest of you,